launch of the Jal Shakti Abhiyan did push water conservation to center stage. But is that enough to deal with the crisis at hand? Hello and welcome to Earth Talks, and welcome sir, Mr. Himanshu Thakkar of the South Asia Network of Dams, Rivers and People to the show. We want to take a deep dive into the state of Indian rivers and whether the Jal Shakti Abhiyan is really addressing the crisis at hand.
So essentially Jal Shakti Abhiyan on the face of it is looking at only ensuring piped water supply to every rural household in next 5 years. That's basically Jal Shakti Abhiyan, Har Ghar Ko Pani. So on the face of it, it doesn't seem that it's really looking at it's looking at very small part of the water issue. Rivers it is not even looking at.
Yes.
And
but rivers are our source of water primarily.
As far as the rural drinking water supply is concerned, the government statistics show that 90% of the rural domestic water supply comes from groundwater.
Yes.
And groundwater, there is a huge issue of source sustainability. The levels are going down, the quality is deteriorating.
Yes.
And the domestic water supply is not the biggest user of groundwater. The bigger user of groundwater is the agriculture sector within the villages. So if you want to ensure sustainability of the source, then you need to bring that bigger part of the puzzle into the governance solution. There is no vision for it, there is no agenda for it. So,
but if I can just ask you, we do hear now the government talking about water conservation. So as far as water conservation is concerned, are we taking on the issues head on? What are the most dominant issues?
Absolutely. In fact, the Prime Minister in his Mann Ki Baat, in the very first Mann Ki Baat in the second session, talked about water conservation and very ironically asked for a people's movement on water conservation.
Yes.
It was a bit of disingenuous because, water governance is monopoly of the government.
Right.
So the one who is having the monopoly over all the water governance is asking people's movement for water conservation. So it's a bit of a problem there.
Right.
The government needs to do a lot more to connect the people with the water governance. Today people don't feel connected with, and that's why there is no real involvement of the people, participation. And water conservation won't happen unless people feel connected, because water is essentially. So, I mean, coming to your question, whether this is government is addressing the key issue. See, I think one has to understand that where does most of the water that India consumes come from? It doesn't come from big dams.
Right.
It doesn't come from dams, rivers. It doesn't come from big irrigation projects. Where does it come from? It comes from groundwater.
Yes. Yes.
More than 2/3 of irrigation and more than 80% of the water used goes for irrigation.
Absolutely. Yeah.
More than 85% to 90% of the rural drinking water supply. More than 55% of the urban and industrial water supply all comes from groundwater. And if you were to plot a graph of percentage of water that comes from each of these sectors from groundwater, it all goes up. But groundwater, the way we are using is unsustainable. In fact, India is the world's biggest groundwater user. It's bigger than number 2 and 3 put together, China and US. But and if you look at the last 4 decades,
Yes.
whatever additional water we got in last 4 decades, 90% of that additional water has come from groundwater. So whether we like it or not, whether we want it or not, groundwater has been India's water lifeline for last 4 decades. It's going to remain our water lifeline. But that reality, that the groundwater is India's water lifeline, is not acknowledged by the government policies,
Right.
or programs, or
Yes.
its practices,
Right.
or its fund allocations,
Right.
or its governance or institutions.
Okay.
It's still dominated by Central Water Commission paradigm, which is essentially for big surface water projects like big dams, river linking projects, big hydropower projects, and so on. So that's
I apologize for interrupting you there, but I do want to understand dams is also being positioned as hydro, as renewable, but we tend to ignore the negative impacts of dams. What are these negative impacts, and why should we not consider it as a clean source of energy?
So if you look at dams as a source of energy, then first thing we need to understand is that India has built more than 5,000 big dams. India is the third largest dam builder in the world. In fact, if you look at the number of dams under construction, India is the highest in the world. Now, out of the dams that we have built, how many are delivering as in terms of hydropower? How many are giving benefits of hydropower? 3%.
Only 3% of those 5,000.
Yeah, more than 5,000.
Right.
It's 5,700.
What is the reason for that?
Basically, no. Those dams have been built for irrigation, not for hydropower.
Right.
So that's first aspect.
Okay.
I'm just saying.
Okay.
The second thing is that, I mean, it's a reality that even India's power minister has acknowledged on the floor of the parliament in last 6 years that big hydropower is no longer even economically viable. It was never socially viable.
Yes.
It was never environmentally viable, as you say. We have ignored those impacts. But now it's not even economically viable. The cost of power from hydropower project today is not less than 6 to 7 rupees per unit. And in market you get power at 2 rupees 80 paisa per unit at the energy exchanges, power exchanges. Every one of the private sector company which was investing in hydropower project, which had promised investment in hydropower, they have all got out.
Yes.
Every one of them. Not one is remaining.
And don't dams bring other complications with them, because we're right now talking about floods in different parts of the country? Are these not related to dams?
So, absolutely. So, dams theoretically are, when they are pushed actually, then justified. One of the benefits that is proposed is that it can help moderate floods, which is theoretically true.
Okay.
Every dam, if operated with that objective in mind, that's the underlying fact. If you operate it with that objective in mind, it can help moderate flood. It can't control floods.
Right.
It can help moderate floods. The point is, if you don't operate dams with that objective, then every dam is actually a source of potential flood disaster for downstream area. Every single dam. We have been highlighting it for many years now. Last year it happened in Kerala. This year, in the first week of August, it happened in Maharashtra Krishna Basin. It followed by Karnataka Krishna Basin, then Karnataka Kali Basin, and Chambal. Just on the 15th of September, it was a Sunday, and the National Crisis Management Committee met on a Sunday, chaired by Cabinet Secretary, to look at what? To look at the crisis at Gandhi Sagar Dam. And they sent a team of officials to the Central Water Commission officials. So,
but I'm not clear. If you're saying the dams were, if they were to fulfill their objective, they would help control floods. So why are they causing floods now? Where have we got wrong?
So basically, because they are not operated with that objective, and
and what is the objective?
The prevailing paradigm is that as soon as your water fill up the dam and sit pretty, and then they love all dam operators love TINA. TINA means there is no alternative. So once you fill the dam, there is no alternative. Then we just, whatever water comes, we will release it. And that's what they do. So now what happened, for example, in Maharashtra Krishna Basin this year, in the first week of August, all the dams were full. And Koina, Radhanagari, and Varna, and many other dams, and they all started releasing water around 5th of August. The date on which downstream Sangli, Satara and Kolhapur districts were receiving heavy rainfall. So
there was a double whammy for them.
So while the downstream were already facing floods, these dams started releasing huge quantities of water. And imagine 5th of August is not even halfway through monsoon.
Yes.
Monsoon is just 1 month has gone through. In fact, it was even more shocking. Downstream Karnataka faced floods in the next week. And Upper Krishna, which is the biggest dam in that area, was filled up by 28th of July, even before the end of July.
Right.
And that it had a backwater impact in Maharashtra around 5th of August. And when they started releasing lakhs of cusecs in downstream, and then it created floods in the downstream Karnataka.
So what you're saying to me is, on the one hand, you have potentially extreme weather conditions exacerbated by climate change.
Absolutely.
And then on the other hand, we've got bad management of our dams.
Yeah.
So it becomes like a double whammy on people living downstream.
Absolutely.
Which then causes the destruction.
And these are avoidable disasters. So first thing is that every dam is supposed to have a rule curve. Rule curve tells that how is dam supposed to be filled up. The basic principle is no dam is supposed to be filled up before you are close to the end of the monsoon. If you fill up earlier, then you are inviting disaster in the downstream area.
Right.
Because you will be then made to release water when the whole area is facing floods, and downstream is also facing floods.
But, I mean, it seems so obvious. Are our policymakers or our dam engineers or the people who manage the dams, do they not know all this?
Exactly. Very good question.
Yeah. So what's
excellent.
the story here?
The story is that no dam operators has ever been punished in India for wrong operation of the dams. There is no accountability. Every dam operators know is irrespective of how I operate, nobody is going to ask me any question. There is going to be no punishment, and it's easier for them.
Right.
It's pretty safe.
Yes.
Dam पानी आया भर दो, फिर जितना पानी आया छोड़ दो.
Could this also be because our perception of modern India was we called dams as the temples of modern India?
So that's
did it emerge from there that we still consider dams as in a very positive aspect? We don't consider them as causing destruction.
Yeah. So that's I mean part of the problem. In fact, Pandit ji said that famously, and then the what is not so well known is that he put this whole Central Water Commission kind of hydrocracy at a pedestal, and they hate transparency, they hate accountability, and they don't believe in participatory governance. They don't like that.
Right.
And so Central Water Commission ensures, in fact last year in Kerala, this very clear cut case that the dams had exacerbated the flood disaster in the downstream area.
Yes.
It was very clear, but even then Central Water Commission promptly sent a team which said that the flood disaster happened not because of the dams but because of the heavy rains.
Right.
Every time disaster happens,
we just
because
blame
of
it on the weather gods.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's move this conversation to if we were to look at policy, what are the top 3 recommendations you would make to policymakers? How do we shift this discourse? We're talking water conservation, we're talking Jal Shakti, and you're saying it's simply become about opening the tap and providing water. How do we link it to our rivers, our groundwater, our natural resources? What are the top 3 policy recommendations you would suggest?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that we need is that we need this sort of restructuring of our institutions, which includes Central Water Commission, Central Groundwater Board and Authority, Central Pollution Control Board and State Pollution Control Boards, and the state level organizations. And we need to change them to have a more National Water Commission kind of situation. But more importantly, the first input we need for better water governance is better water information.
Yes.
And for that we need an independent organization as one of the restructuring efforts to whose charge will be only to gather all hydrological data, river flow data, river quality, groundwater data, groundwater quality, silt flow, everything in biodiversity in the rivers and so on, and put it out in public domain. That organization will have no role in development or management. It will only gather information and put it out. So it will excel. Its mandate will be to give reliable information.
But once we have that all that information, what do we do?
So exactly. So that's why I'm saying. So the other part of this restructuring is that you will have an organization like National Water Commission, which will be in charge of not surface water or groundwater, but overall water. And we need a third leg of this whole thing, an organization which is charged with monitoring the state of health of our rivers. Today, I mean, believe it or not, in a country like India, where rivers are supposed to be revered, our prayers, our festivals, our culture, our religion, it's all full of so much importance for rivers, and in such a country, the rivers are one of the worst state in the world, and there is not even one organization which is even monitoring or reporting to us what is the health of our rivers. So we need an organization which does that, just
and
that.
would you say that the national, the
What,
Ganga
River
Authority,
Commission?
the River Commission,
Yeah.
or we have the Namami Gange program, none of them address any
Look
of
at-
these issues?
Look at the state of this river. I mean, we have been trying to change the state of Ganga since 30 years now. It's 1985 when one of the prime
Yes.
ministers started
Yes.
talking about
Yes.
it.
Yes.
What is the change in the state of the Ganga? It has gone worse. What is this government doing on Namami Gange? It's more of the same, more infrastructure.
Yes, we're cleaning up the ghats, but
Exactly,
we're not perhaps looking at the river.
beautifying the
Yes,
ghats,
yes.
but not looking at the state of the river. One of the important things that rivers required is flow. And there is not even attention. Somebody like G.D. Agrawal had to go on fast to
Yes,
ensure that the
yes.
river has flow.
Yes.
But this government, which is supposed to be right-wing government, just ignored his fast. And he died. He had to actually, the first time in possibly independent India,
Yes.
that somebody had to die for such a cause, fasting.
Right.
And the government refused to even talk to him.
Yes.
Even on the cause on which the Prime Minister himself had tweeted earlier when he was on fast during UPA time. So we really, the Namami Gange is not really doing that. It's doing business as usual kind of efforts. And so it's more technology, more money, more infrastructure, but no attention to the governance.
Okay. So what you're saying is perhaps setting up of a national water commission,
Yes.
collecting of more data, and more importantly disseminating it out
Yes.
to the public,
Yes.
and hopefully then civil society
Yeah.
can then take more action depending on that, and then changing the perception of our dams, that
Yes,
sometimes they can
absolutely.
cause floods as well.
Absolutely, and for that we need change our dam governance, reservoir governance totally. The people who are the biggest stakeholders when the reservoir create floods, it's the people who are facing the floods.
Yes.
And do they have any role in the governance of the reservoirs? They have no role. They don't even have information. So this needs to change really. So there is in the governance, I think, is the new God in the water in the water management. And if we change governance, then we can change a lot.
So a new water god, a new form of governance for water, that should hopefully bring the conservation aspect in Jal Shakti back. Thank you so much for speaking to us.
Thank you.